With the advent of the Netflix Death Note movie, I've decided to take a look back at a better live-action adaptation of Death Note. This would be Shunsuke Kaneko's duology. That's right. Duology, because fuck if I'm going to count this crap. Both of the Death Note movies came out in 2006, basically to capitalize on the manga ending that same year. These movies, and the series itself, actually holds a special place in my heart. Death Note was one of the earliest animes that I actively sought out because it was an anime. And for a time, I was a die-hard fan. If you don't remember having to watch a Death Note broken up into 3 parts on YouTube, then you can get the fuck out of my face. After blasting through the TV series, I picked up the movies and was blown away, kind of. At the time, I didn't like how much they deviated from the source material. But as I grew older, I began to see that there were some very obvious cracks in that same source material. So I've decided to revisit the Death Note movies with a fresh perspective. I just sat down and watched them for the first time in years. So here we go. This movie is basically the early parts of the manga. The very early parts of the manga. Roughly about 2 volumes, plus an original ending stuck onto it. It covers Light getting the Death Note, his first confrontation with L, him being tailed by the FBI, and then concludes with Naomi's storyline. All of these feel really separated, almost like it's different arcs and chapters from a manga. Go figure. The pacing of a weekly manga is definitely more in line with a weekly anime than it is a single movie. Because it's sticking so very close to the early parts of the manga, the movie actually feels pretty stretched out. It's almost like they were just testing the waters with this movie before going all in with the next one. But that aside, there are changes that were made for the better. Light is no longer a high school student, but a college student studying law. Already, this gives us a much better established character from the self-described bored high schooler that he originally was. There's a wonderful irony in Light being a law student while committing copious amounts of murder. On top of that, it establishes Light's intelligence right away without the need for the viewer to be told. Naomi's story is also expanded. In the manga, she is kind of the first person to really challenge Light, but she's pretty unceremoniously killed off. And that's completely fine when it's a victim of the week type story in a weekly manga, in a movie that doesn't work out so well. So to make up for this, they also built up Light's relationship with his girlfriend, who in the manga was just some girl that Light used to catch a person tailing him. In this movie, he uses her, and specifically he uses her death to get rid of Naomi and better position himself in the Kira investigation. And that is a huge departure from the manga, but it's also the part that I like best from the film. Pulling the strings behind the death of Naomi and his girlfriend is the point of no return for Light. This is the point where we as an audience know there is no going back if there ever was to begin with. To cap this all off, the movie ends with this fantastic scene of Light finally meeting L face to face in a perfect setup for a sequel. Overall, the first Death Note movie is half of a movie, stretched out to a full movie length. But even if it does drag on a bit, the movie definitely has its high points towards the end. The sequel is where shit finally starts to hit the fan, as Light and L actually start their battle of wits. The pace is also stepped up considerably. While the first movie covered the first 2 volumes, this one is covering everything up to L's death. The segmented pacing is still there, but it seems to flow better. Although that might have been because that's how it was in the manga. This time we see the second Kira, which leads into Misa and Light's imprisonment, which directly leads into the third Kira, and finally leads into L's death. Even though there's much more ground to cover, this movie still takes its time when it needs to. There's a wonderful scene where Light's father is investigating his room and comes across a set of law books that he gave Light for his 18th birthday. This is a character moment, and this is a character moment for Light and his father that eventually pays off at the end of this movie. It's also something that many anime to live action adaptations forget to do because they just assume that you already know the characters from the much longer TV show or manga. In general, that's what could be said best about this movie. While there are some huge leaps in logic that were present in the original, the last name faithfully recreates the essence of Death Note's characters. And because of that, the last name really gets L and Light's dynamic. How they can act like the closest of friends while still being the most bitter of enemies. But most importantly of all, the story ends with their conflict. This is, without a doubt, the single biggest problem everyone cites with Death Note. And you know what? It's completely true. It honestly didn't matter who won. If it was L or Kira, it was their battle that kept people reading this whole time. The second you lose that, you lose your audience. So concluding on L's death, and even giving it a little bit of an adaptational twist, makes the story infinitely more satisfying. For me, this scene right here is where Death Note ends. There's already a lot of talent behind these films to begin with. Kaneko had previously directed some of the best kaiju films to ever exist. This would include the Gamera trilogy and Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, which is by far one of the best Godzilla films. Alongside him is legendary Kenji Kawai, whose discography includes Ghost in the Shell, Gundam 00, and the original Ring movies, just to name a few. Kaneko also brings together a pretty solid cast for these movies. Kenichi Matsuyama does a great job capturing L's quirks and mannerisms down to a T. He would later play Kato in the live-action Gantz movies, which were considerably much worse. While I was never quite sold on Tatsuya Fujiwara as Light, he does work great in scenes where he needs to get overly emotional. He's probably most known as the lead character in Battle Royale, and honestly, I can't really see him as anything else. Erika Toda plays a somewhat more stable and somehow less annoying Misa, which is a huge feat for anyone attempting this part. Apparently, Kaneko wanted to tone down a lot of the traits that Misa had, and honestly, that was probably a better decision when going live action, because otherwise you have this bubbly anime character that doesn't really fit with the rest of your movie. Professional stage actor Takashi Kaga is a perfect fit as Light's father. He has that kind of stern look, the dad look, but along with him is Hikari Mitsushima, who only has a bit part as Sayu Yagami. But I just wanted to mention that she was in Love Exposure, which is one of the best movies ever made. Go watch it. Altogether, this is a pretty good setup, but it feels like there might have been a bumpy production schedule. For starters, both these movies were released in 2006, which means that they were basically filmed and edited at the same time. This makes me wonder if the pacing issues aren't caused by an external factor. Kaneko is no stranger to film, but around this time he was also working a lot on Ultraman Max, from which he pulled Mitsushima to be Sayu. I wouldn't be surprised if these Death Note movies were originally planned as a TV miniseries. While the production values aren't bad, they were never really movie quality. Of course, this could also be a case of spreading one film's budget across two different films. I actually do enjoy the CGI Shimigami. They stick out like a sore thumb, but they're actually pretty decent models. And they had these real giant life models for the actors to play off of, so it shows that there's more effort than just a person blindly talking to a tennis ball on a green screen. Looking back, these movies had a heart to them. Even if they were made to capitalize on the manga's conclusion, it still feels like Kaneko and the rest of the crew actually did want to make these movies as faithful as possible. And as far as Death Note related media goes, I'd definitely put the last name on the high end, with the first movie being just a bit lower. It doesn't fix all the problems that the manga had. In fact, it even comes up with a few new ones. But there's a certain charm to these movies that I can never quite just write off.